Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Have you ever seen those satellite pictures of China's huge strategic oil sites? Dengjiakou, for instance. It honestly looks like this massive tray of giant, perfectly round cake tins, with floating roofs. And the story coming out of those tins right now is, well, it's pretty staggering. That huge coastal complex, it's only about 2 years old, is already more than half full. They've added another 10 million barrels of crude oil just since mid-January.
Right. And the crucial thing for you to understand is this isn't just them buying oil when the price dips a bit. This really aggressive stockpiling we're seeing across fuel, yes, but also food and metals. It's part of a very deliberate three-pronged national strategy. It really kicked off early in 2024.
Ah, okay. So this isn't just about having reserves for, say, economic stability.
No, not primarily. The core goal here is deeply strategic. It's about drastically cutting the country's vulnerability to outside shocks, geopolitical disruptions. They're clearly anticipating more trade friction, maybe higher U.S. tariffs. It's about building a really big multi-layered cushion, a geopolitical and economic.
Okay, so China's building up this resilience, this leverage, by hoarding physical stuff. That seems clear. But here's the critical question, isn't it? If a country gets rid of one set of geopolitical risks by securing resources like this, what new risks does it create? Maybe complex financial ones. Supply chain dependencies. That's the tightrope we're going to look at today. So let's start with the plan itself. You said 3 strategies running at the same time. The first one sounds like tackling the problem right at home, boosting domestic production.
Exactly. And they've actually had some real success there, particularly in energy. If you look back to 2019, domestic oil output is up noticeably, gone from about 3.8 million barrels a day to 4.4 million now. Natural gas production, that's jumped by 50% over the same time frame.
That really matters then. It shows a real drive for energy self-sufficiency, even if importing might look cheaper on paper sometimes.
Absolutely. It demonstrates that the spending isn't just following the market, it's driven by policy. They're keeping up that strong domestic investment, even with global oil prices being kind of low this year, just to keep production near those record levels.
And it's not just energy.
No, this focus on domestic security covers critical minerals too. There's a new 2-year plan out, specifically targeting more homegrown supply of strategic metals, things like copper, lithium, cobalt, the absolute essentials for the modern economy.
Okay, which leads us to the second pillar. This is the one that's maybe most visible. Just building up the actual reserves. The scale of the oil stockpiling is, well, it's quite something.
It really is. Observable oil stocks, the stuff we can actually track, jumped by a huge 110 million barrels just in 2025. That brings the total in their strategic and commercial storage, the visible parts at least, to around 1.2 billion barrels.
Well, hang on. 1.2 billion barrels. Let's put that in perspective. Our sources suggest that's roughly 3 times the size of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Does a number that big mean they're sort of done, or is there more to come?
That's a really important point. You do hear these aspirational numbers like a 2 billion barrel capacity goal eventually. That's probably a very long-term target, years away. But the hard evidence, the measurable stuff, confirms the momentum is still strong. They definitely have between 1.2 and 1.25 billion barrels right now. And we know for sure they're planning to build about another 169 million barrels of new storage, commercial and strategic, across 11 specific sites between now and 2026. So this is definitely ongoing.
And we're seeing a similar push in natural gas storage too, right? But the numbers there can be a bit confusing. Sometimes you hear figures like 30 or 40 billion cubic meters BCM.
Yeah, that bigger number, the 30-40 BC meter, tends to be a broader figure. It includes everything, even the big LNG tanks you see at import terminals. But if you want a metric that really tells you about resilience for, say, a cold winter snap, you need to look at the underground gas storage, specifically the working gas volume. Right now, that figure is about 19.8 BC meters.
Okay, why is that working gas number the one to watch more than the total capacity?
Because working gas is the amount you can actually pull out quickly and reliably when demand spikes, like during winter peaks. It's the real operational buffer. And what's truly revealing is the speed. They added 6 BC meters of that UGS working gas capacity just this year. That makes it easily the fastest build-out of underground gas storage happening anywhere in the world right now. It just signals this intense focus on removing that vulnerability to sudden supply interruptions.
Right. So pillars 1 and 2. Make more at home, hold more in reserve. Pillar 3 must be about imports then, since they still need them. Diversifying where they come from.
Correct. Recognizing they'll still need imports, but trying to spread the risk. So that means things like deeper energy ties with Russia, Qatar, Malaysia. It means securing regular shipments from difficult places like those Arctic LNG projects. And it also means building new ways to get resources overland. Think about that new railway connecting Mongolia's huge coal fields directly into China. It's all about building redundancy, having options everywhere.
Okay, so this is where the strategy starts to really impact things beyond China's borders. These huge stockpiles aren't just sitting there defensively. They're already changing global trade, strengthening China's hand in negotiations.
Absolutely. Think about the energy leverage alone. With such deep reserves, China feels much more comfortable buying crude oil from sanctioned countries like Iran and Russia. Often, they can do these deals with less reliance on US dollar financing, too. That sheer volume they're buying essentially helps support, even validate, alternative financial systems and shipping networks. It gives them a flexibility in buying that others just don't have.
And that flexibility, plus all that storage infrastructure, has turned China into a significant player in global gas markets, too. A swing supplier, I've heard it called.
It certainly looks that way. We've definitely seen instances where they resell surplus LNG cargoes onto the international market when global prices shoot up. So if their own industrial demand eases off a bit, they can quickly switch to exporting. They turn that national resilience into, well, market leverage and, frankly, revenue. They're basically adding to global volatility sometimes, acting as a short-term price setter in Asia, depending on their needs.
That's a really interesting dynamic. Now, what about metals? Our sources mention this issue of opacity, a lack of clarity. Imports of key stuff like copper, zinc, nickel have surged, even while Chinese industrial demand seems to have softened a bit. That seems odd.
That gap between imports and apparent demand strongly suggests they're accumulating stocks. Strategic accumulation. Some estimates suggest that the inventories they've built up recently could cover well over a whole year's worth of domestic nickel consumption, for example. And this huge volume, often held outside the normal channels visible to traders in the West, makes it much harder for the global market to figure out true supply and demand. It clouds price discovery for everyone else. Nobody's quite sure how much is really sitting there.
But perhaps the most significant strategic move, the one that could really affect foreign companies directly, is on the regulatory front. This attempt to create something like the U.S. rules with reach idea.
Yes, this is potentially a major shift in how they exert economic influence, sort of extending their regulatory territory. Specifically, there was a package of regulations announced on October 9th. It expands the licensing requirements for exporting rare earths and materials used in battery supply chains. The implication here is really important. Our sources talk about these rules creating compliance hooks.
Compliance hooks. What does that actually mean for, say, a car maker in Germany or a battery producer in South Korea using Chinese rare earths?
It could mean that if you're using materials that fall under this new licensing system, Beijing might try to impose conditions on how or where you can use, process, or even sell the final products made with those materials, even outside China. The rules essentially try to follow the product across borders. It's an extraterritorial ambition. The idea seems to be to deter foreign governments from putting their own restrictions on supply chains that rely on China. And this is scheduled to take effect on November 8th, 2025. It forces foreign companies to factor Beijing's potential policy aims into their own risk assessments.
That definitely shows strategic thinking. But let's shift to the costs. Building stability like this on such a massive scale must be incredibly expensive and bring new risks.
Oh, absolutely. It's inherently costly. Buying and storing all that oil, for example, ties up enormous amounts of capital and inventory that's just sitting there. And there's significant price risk. If market analysts are right, and crude oil prices fall by, say, $10 or even $20 a barrel next year, the opportunity cost for China, the money they could have saved or made elsewhere, could run into billions and billions of yuan.
So they must be trying very hard to time their buying or find ways to lower the average cost.
You'd assume so. It requires very sophisticated timing of those large purchases. And it explains why they lean so heavily on getting discounted oil, especially from sanctions-hit suppliers like Russia and Iran. It helps bring down that average purchase price and manage the risk of the value depreciating.
And it seems like diversifying in one area can actually concentrate risk somewhere else. We saw this quite starkly with food, specifically soybeans, didn't we?
Yes, that's a fascinating example of how a direct geopolitical move created a new, very specific vulnerability. Because of trade tensions and tariffs imposed earlier this year, China made a tactical decision to shift its soybean buying almost entirely away from the U.S. They turned heavily towards South America, instead mainly Brazil and Argentina.
And the impact of that shift was pretty much immediate.
Dramatic. In September, literally 0 soybeans arrived from the U.S. 0. Now, while that most certainly put pressure on the U.S. agricultural sector, it simultaneously made China highly dependent on just 2 countries, Brazil and Argentina, for this critical foodstuff. They basically swapped one risk, potential U.S. trade actions, for another, a major concentration risk.
Which leaves them much more exposed now to problems in just those 2 places, right? Bad weather, a port strike, political instability in Brazil or Argentina could suddenly become a major headache for China's food supply.
Exactly. They traded a macro geopolitical risk for a more concentrated micro supply chain risk, a classic trade-off. And this underlying tension, this trade-off between gaining resilience and losing transparency, it applies just as much to the metals stockpiling. Building those huge, opaque buffers improves national security, sure, but it actively distorts global price signals. Chinese authorities have this constant balancing act. How much information to reveal through licensing or occasional stockpile releases? Too much secrecy creates volatility for global markets. Too much openness reduces their own strategic advantage.
So for listeners trying to track this really complex strategy moving forward, what are the key things, the practical metrics we should keep an eye on next year? How do we gauge if it's working, and what complexities are emerging?
I think there are 3 main areas to watch closely for measurable signs. First, stick with the oil numbers. Will we see third-party satellite data continue to confirm that trend towards, say, 1.5 billion barrels in total storage by 2026? Reaching that kind of level would signal continued success in the sheer scale of the build. Second, keep a very close eye on gas storage. Does that crucial UGS working gas figure keep climbing? Does it rise by another, say, 3 to 6 billion cubic meters in 2026? If it does, that indicates a sustained push to eliminate that winter supply vulnerability.
And the third area, that must be the regulations, the rules with reach.
Absolutely. That's critical and has global implications. We really need to watch how strictly or how flexibly that new rare earth and battery licensing system is implemented after November 8th. You'll want to track things like, are licenses being granted quickly or slowly? Are there broad exceptions or general licenses issued? The actual on-the-ground implementation will tell us how sharp those compliance hooks really are for international businesses.
Okay, so if we step back and look at the whole picture, the domestic production push, the massive reserves, this new regulatory power, what's the overall assessment? Is the strategy working?
I think the broad assessment has to be that the reserves build, in particular, is achieving its main goal. It is building resilience. It is increasing negotiation leverage. That part seems undeniable. The big question now isn't really if they can build these massive stockpiles. They clearly can. It's more about how efficiently they can manage this incredibly complex system over the long run. And efficiency here means successfully handling the huge costs, navigating the market opacity they create, and managing those shifting concentration risks like we saw with soybeans as geopolitics and markets continue to change. The long-term sustainability of that efficiency, that's the big open question, I think.
It really underscores that stability isn't free, is it? It's being bought, but at the price of immense complexity and new, perhaps unforeseen risks. China's actions here are undoubtedly forcing every other major commodity buyer around the world to take a hard look at their own supply security. It highlights that in today's world, maybe you don't really eliminate risks altogether. You just end up rearranging them, sometimes into more concentrated, potentially fragile forms. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.